There's a lot going on with North Idaho College lately. In fact, it's been that way for the past 2 years, and it hasn't exactly been a good thing for the school. The latest coming over the weekend when the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities issued another warning to the community college in Coeur d'Alene, saying your accreditation is on the line. And they listed more than a handful of standards of accreditation in which North Idaho College seems to not be in compliance. The school has until January 4th to respond, by the way. And notice I said another warning of accreditation compliance. Like I said, North Idaho College has been going through some things lately. So much so that there have been several stories written about what is going on with the 10,000 student school, some of them more than 2,000 words long. Now, we can't do that here on television, but let's get to the 208 abridged version of how North Idaho College got here. There was an election in November of 2020 in which the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee, they showed a lot of interest in that election. And in that election, Todd Banducci, the longest serving member of the board to that point, ran unopposed and won. So did Greg McKenzie, and so did Michael Barnes. And the 5-member board looked like this: Banducci, McKenzie, Barnes, Christy Wood, and Ken Howard. Barnes would eventually resign in January of 2022. Apparently, there was some question as to whether he actually lived in North Idaho or South Dakota, so he'd be out soon. Meanwhile, in March of 2021, several human rights groups sent a letter of complaint to the Northwest Colleges of Accreditation, the region's accrediting body, highlighting a series of escalated acts by Banducci and the board, claiming they violated students' and staff civil rights. Jump to September of 2021. The fired president, Rick McLennan, the board fired President Rick McLennan without cause or explanation. He'd been president since 2016. The board then hired the school's wrestling coach as interim president a month later, pointing to his doctorate in educational leadership as, well, he's a good fit. A month after that, a second complaint filed with NWCCU, citing those two things and for the board refusing to adopt an infectious disease policy in the middle of a pandemic. Jump ahead to February this year. A panel with the NWCCU recommends Idaho's State Board of Education start overseeing what's happening at NIC and their board, and suggests the college be placed on probation for accreditation. But instead, well, that panel actually just issues an accreditation warning to the school. That same week, longtime trustees Christy Wood and Ken Howard announced resignations effective May 3rd. So now, because of Barnes' resignation, there was no longer enough members on the board to make decisions, which would be a quorum. And according to state law, that would mean the State Board of Ed would appoint replacements. However, Banducci and McKenzie, well, they filed a lawsuit to stop that from happening, saying the State Board of Ed can only appoint one trustee to complete the quorum. But they pulled their lawsuit a week later. So the State Board of Ed did that. They appointed members to the board. And on May 6th, they named David Wold, John Getty, Pete Brochette as successors. The NIC board is now Chair Banducci, McKenzie, Wold, Getty, and Brochette. The next month, that board hires the next president, Nick Swain, hired him from Virginia. Banducci and McKenzie, well, they voted against that hiring. Then comes the election last month. Terry Zimmerman, Brad Corkle, and Mike Wagoner are elected to replace those appointed trustees. The NIC Board of Trustees now looks like this. That'd be Todd Banducci, Greg McKenzie, Terry Zimmerman, Brad Corkle, and Mike Wagoner. A few weeks later, Mark Lyons resigned as attorney for NIC after 23 years in doing so, saying, "It had become clear that my services are no longer desired by those who will soon hold a majority position with the Board of Trustees." Then in their first meeting together, that Board of Trustees on December 5th, Todd Banducci voted for himself as the new chair, went on about a 7-minute rant about how he had been treated the past year, then rescinded his vote as chair and voted to put Greg McKenzie in that position. The board also accepted the resignation of that attorney Lyons and named Art McComber the new attorney. Art McComber, the man who lost the Republican primary for attorney general, that same one. You know who opposed that hiring? President Nick Swain, because he said that hiring and the discussion of it seemed to violate Idaho's public meetings laws. President Swain was then placed on leave by the board 4 days later. Then a week after that, Mr. Swain filed a lawsuit to be reinstated. Like I said, it is a lot. So we wanted to know more about how we got here from an investigative reporter working in North Idaho who's been exploring that kind of stuff. Daniel Walters has looked into North Idaho College and extremism in Idaho extensively. And he told us today, you can trace this tumultuous 2 years for NIC to that November 2020 election.
We got to remember this is 2020, where there's all of this already like conflict. Everyone's suddenly focusing on education in terms of, are we going to be wearing masks? Are we going to do online classes? This is a really big deal, especially in North Idaho, where there's just a ton of conservatives. It's a really big deal too. And so it wasn't necessarily surprised that there was a push by the local Republican Party there to try to elect people to those positions.
This all kind of spawned because the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee said, we need to be on school boards.
Yes. Yeah. So like this has been a thing for a while. So this has been a little bit of a thing for a while. But when I talked to Bjorn Handin, who was one of the longtime member of the Kootenai County Republicans, and he basically tells me that, hey, we are feeling like the real power is not necessarily even in these legislators. It's not in these big high profile positions. It's in it's in the Board of Health, it's in the sewer board, it's in the water board, it's in the school boards. And so this is like an actual effort to try to like put their people, some of whom, and Bjorn admitted this, weren't very experienced at all. So they didn't have a lot of experience. This is one of their challenges. Suddenly they're getting, put in charge of some of these environments, and they don't necessarily have the experience built up. But they feel like they're basically fighting the deep state. They're fighting the bureaucrats. They're fighting the cocktail swirling academic class that is sort of holding back the conservative movement.
It doesn't seem to be working out very well for them the last couple of years. When it comes to the North Idaho College, it has not been running smoothly.
No, it's not been smooth at all. But if you talk to them, they will say it's not our fault that things are going smoothly. It's these. It's the Save NIC, it's the Friends of NIC, it's these people that say they love the college that are trying to actually they're actually causing the problems. They're arguing that the accreditation crisis has been overblown, that these people are exaggerating it for political gain. And so they kind of feel like it's those kind of maneuvers that have created the problem and not their sort of agenda.
Is there a possibility that North Idaho College is going to go away? They're going to lose their accreditation and they're not going to be the school they've been for decades?
I say yes with a caveat. And the caveat is that basically like they're in a warning stage right now, and they still haven't reached the probation stage. But it looks like from the most recent, I mean, they gave them like 2 weeks to try to like respond to some of their concerns. It does seem like the accreditation body is extremely concerned about what's happening.
What's your overall view of what's happening and what's going to happen?
We have a long time power struggle between the establishment moderate portions of the Idaho GOP and the more right-wing hardcore section of the Idaho GOP. The hardcore section is just dominating in terms of grassroots, in terms of elections, in terms of they have their own media infrastructure, their own media ecosystem. And what's happened is the college is basically the rope in the middle of that tug of war. And at this point, every kind of poll, every side, the rope is getting more and more frayed. And the danger is that eventually that rope might break. And to some degree, if like one of the sides just said, okay, I don't care anymore, we're just going to let you control it, it might be better for the college ultimately, because you might not be in that same risk of accreditation. But to some degree, it's the back and forth that's really doing a lot of damage.
You know, that explanation of the tug of war and the fraying rope Daniel made kind of sounds like a microcosm of the whole Republican Party right now in Idaho. Again, this is just a warning to North Idaho College from that Accreditation Commission. They've been here before, and they're still a few steps away from actually losing accreditation. They have 2 weeks to respond to the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. So if North Idaho College does lose its accreditation, well, the school and its students will lose access to federal financial aid, and any credits earned will likely have a hard time transferring to another school. By the way, we have tried to reach out to trustee Todd Banducci and former trustees, but have yet to receive a response. We also reached out to the school president, Nick Swain, who was placed on leave 10 days ago. He said he'd prefer not to participate in an interview at this time.